Tonight we enter a world before alphabets, before parchment, before ink dried beneath the hand of a monk or the signature of a king. We descend instead into the low, sun-baked plains of southern Mesopotamia, where the Euphrates and the Tigris spread their waters through marsh, reed bed, canal, and field, and where the first cities rose from mud like offerings to the sky. Here, long before the stone temples of Greece, long before the legions of Rome, long before the libraries of Alexandria, human memory found a new body. It was not born in gold. It was not carved first upon marble. It was pressed into clay. The mystery begins with a silence. For tens of thousands of years, human beings spoke, sang, traded, mourned, commanded, prayed, remembered, and forgot. Their voices vanished into air. Their stories lived only as long as breath could carry them and minds could hold them. The hunter knew the path of gazelles. The mother knew the healing route. The elder knew the names of the dead. The priest knew the season when the river would swell. Yet all of it was fragile. Memory could bend. Memory could die. A village could burn, and with it, 1,000 unnamed truths. Then, in the late 4th millennium before the Common Era, in the crowded precincts of ancient Sumer, something changed. A hand took up a reed. A tablet of wet clay lay ready, cool and yielding, gathered from the riverbanks where water and silt made the land fertile. That hand pressed a sign into the surface, not a picture for beauty, not an ornament, not a charm, a mark with purpose, a mark that could be read by another person at another time, a mark that could survive the speaker. In that moment, though no one may have understood it fully, history began to remember itself. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. The first written language did not arrive like a sunrise over a clean horizon. It emerged slowly, crowded by older habits, older symbols, and older ways of counting the world. Archaeologists working through stratigraphic excavation in the ruins of southern Mesopotamia have found clay tablets whose surfaces seem almost modest at first glance. Small rectangles, rounded edges, lines, boxes, impressed shapes, numbers, and signs. Yet within these humble fragments lies a revolution more profound than the raising of walls or the forging of bronze. These tablets reveal the moment when human thought began to leave durable footprints, radiocarbon dating of surrounding materials, comparison of archaeological layers, and careful study of ancient settlement patterns have placed many of the earliest tablets in the great urban age of Uruk, around 3,400 to 3,000 before the Common Era. Uruk was not merely a town. It was an immense human experiment. Its temples rose above dense neighbourhoods. Its workshops rang with labour. Its storehouses swallowed grain, wool, oil, beer, fish, cattle, and reeds. Its canals carried goods across the flat, glittering landscape. Its people lived in a world becoming too large for memory alone. Imagine the evening light along the wide banks of the Euphrates. The air is heavy with the smell of wet earth, smoke, animal dung, and barley beer. Reed boats slide through brown water. Men haul baskets. Women weave and grind grain. Children move between courtyards. Priests climb toward whitewashed temples. Officials measure fields, count jars, assign labour, and receive offerings meant for the gods. Somewhere within this living machinery, someone must know what came in, what went out, who owed what, and what belonged to the temple. Speech was no longer enough. A spoken order could be denied, a remembered number could be disputed, a promise could dissolve when the witness died. But clay could hold, clay could harden, clay could remain when voices faded and bodies returned to dust. This was the practical miracle at the heart of Sumerian writing. It was born not only from poetry or philosophy, but from pressure. The pressure of cities, the pressure of food storage, the pressure of labour, the pressure of gods who demanded offerings and institutions that demanded records. And yet, to call it mere accounting is to flatten its wonder. These early marks were doors. At first they opened onto sheep, grain, jars, labourers, and rations. Soon they opened onto names, then offices, then places, then commands, then hymns, then kings, then myths of creation and flood, sorrow and longing, divine anger and mortal ambition. A system made to count barley became a system that could carry the human soul. This is why Sumerian texts remain so unsettling. They reveal that writing was not simply invented by one genius on one clear morning. It was built by countless hands in a civilization where gods and mortals once seemed to walk the same earth. The people of Sumer were not primitive shadows waiting for modern minds to explain them. They were organizers, theologians, mathematicians, builders, astronomers, merchants, farmers, mourners, and dreamers. They watched the rivers and feared their floods. They negotiated with drought and salinity. They raised temples from mud brick and filled them with meaning. They understood that the visible world and the unseen world were intertwined. Modern scholars approach their remains with tools the Sumerians could never have imagined. Stratigraphic excavation reveals the buried sequence of walls, floors, tablets, kilns, and refuse. Clay sourcing studies help identify where tablets were made. Lithic analysis of tools and broader material culture places writing within a wider technological world. Genomic data from ancient populations across the Near East has begun to illuminate patterns of movement, mixture, and continuity. Though the language of the tablet still guards its own mysteries, the science sharpens the image, but never removes the haze entirely, for the earliest tablets do not speak easily. Many are administrative, many signs remain debated, some signs began as images, then shifted into abstract forms. Some signs represented things, some represented sounds, some represented ideas. The system was not simple, it was alive, changing under the pressure of use. Every tablet is both evidence and enigma, a fossil of thought impressed by a vanished hand. Hold one in the imagination, it fits in the palm, it is not grand, it has no shining surface. Its edges are worn, its signs are small, almost secretive. Yet it may preserve a transaction older than the pyramids, a list of workers older than Homer, a temple account older than most kingdoms known to tradition. The person who made it could not have known that thousands of years later, strangers would stand answerless, adrift to ponder the meaning of those marks. This is the strange power of clay. Fire can destroy palaces, but it can bake tablets harder. Invasion can scatter archives, but broken pieces can wait beneath dust. Time can erase names from mouths, but signs pressed into mud may endure for 5,000 years. So the first written language reaches us not as a clean proclamation, but as a whisper from storehouses, temples, and buried rooms. And in that whisper is a mystery still burning. Why did writing begin here? Why did Sumer, among marshes and mud brick cities, cross that invisible threshold? Was it the need to count goods, or the need to serve gods? Was it administration, ritual, power, memory, or all of these braided together like reeds? Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made. For now, the tablets remain, small and silent, yet vast enough to contain the dawn of history. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as we settle into the ancient dark, write your location and local time in the comments, so we may know where across the modern world these old clay voices are being heard tonight, long before writing became literature, long before a scribe could shape a prayer or preserve the name of a king. There were small objects held in the hand. They were quiet things. Cones, spheres, discs, cylinders, and tiny shaped counters made of clay. They could be counted, exchanged, enclosed, sealed, and stored. To modern eyes they may look like toys, beads, or fragments of forgotten games, yet in the deep history of human thought, these small tokens stand near the threshold of the written word. Across the ancient Near East, farmers, herders, traders, and temple officials lived in a world where number mattered. A flock had to be known, a jar of oil had to be measured, a basket of grain had to be promised, delivered, divided, or withheld. Human beings had always counted with fingers, notches, knots, stones, and memory. But as villages grew more complex and goods moved farther from their place of origin, counting needed a body outside the mind. So clay became a language before language. A small cone might stand for a measure of grain. A sphere might represent an animal. A disc might refer to another kind of commodity. The exact systems varied across time and place, and still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. But the principle was astonishingly simple. A thing could stand for another thing. A mark, object, or shape could preserve an agreement. A quantity could be carried from one person to another without the goods themselves being present. Here, in these humble pieces of fired or dried clay, abstraction began to gather strength. Imagine a storehouse near the edge of a settlement. The walls are mud brick. The roof is reed matting packed with earth. The air smells of straw, clay dust, and stored grain. Workers bring baskets from the fields. An official sits near the entrance. Beside him are tokens, each one representing something that must be remembered. He does not write in the later sense. He does not compose sentences. But he is already doing something that belongs to writing's deep ancestry. He's turning the world into signs. The tokens were not merely objects. They were agreements made visible. Their power depended on shared understanding. A token had meaning because a community accepted its meaning. That is one of the oldest and most profound secrets of writing. A sign is never alone. It lives inside a social world. It requires trust, training, memory, habit, and authority. Without these, a mark is only a scratch. With them, it becomes law, debt, offering, ration, ownership, and command. Over many centuries, these tokens were sometimes placed inside hollow clay envelopes, known by scholars as bulo. Picture a small clay ball, sealed while still damp. Inside it were counters representing a transaction. Outside it, the surface might be impressed with seal marks. The sealed envelope protected the contents. It also created a problem. To know what was inside, one had to break it open. The answer was both practical and revolutionary. People began pressing the tokens onto the outside of the envelope before sealing them within. At that moment, a shadow became enough. The impression of a token could stand for the token itself. The mark could replace the object. The surface of clay could carry the information without requiring the original counter to remain visible. This was not yet writing as a full record of speech, but it was a decisive turn. The world was moving from three-dimensional tokens to two-dimensional signs. A sheep did not need to be present. The token for sheep did not need to be exposed. A pressed mark could speak for both. Such discoveries have unsettled older assumptions. Many once imagined writing as the sudden creation of symbols for spoken words, perhaps born from the desire to record royal deeds, sacred hymns, or epic stories. Yet the archaeological evidence suggests a slower and stranger origin. Writing was not first a mirror of poetry. It was a technology of accountability. It grew from counting, sealing, storing, and remembering obligations. In its earliest roots, writing did not ask, "Who are we?" It asked, "How many?" How? But the question, how many, can become dangerous. It changes the shape of society. When goods are counted, they can be taxed. When labour is listed, it can be commanded. When offerings are recorded, they can be demanded again. When debts are remembered by clay, they outlive argument. The token was small, but the world it helped create was immense. It was a world of institutions, hierarchies, temples, workshops, and long-distance exchange. It was a world in which power learned to keep records. Cylinder seals deepened the transformation. These carved objects, rolled across wet clay, left continuous images and patterns. They might show animals, divine symbols, ritual scenes, or signs of ownership. A seal was personal, administrative, and almost magical. It could close a jar, secure a door, authenticate a shipment, or mark a transaction. The rolling of a seal across clay was a gesture of authority. It said, "This has been seen. This has been approved. This belongs within an ordered world." There is something haunting in the intimacy of these tools. The seal fits the hand. The token rests between fingers. The clay receives pressure from skin, reed, stone, or carved surface. The earliest path toward writing was tactile. It was made by touch. It belonged to palms stained with river mud, to officials bent over tablets, to workers carrying goods beneath the white heat of the Mesopotamian sun. The first written language did not descend from the clouds. It rose from contact between hand, clay and necessity. Archaeologists have studied these objects through careful classification, stratigraphic excavation, residue analysis, and comparison across sites from Mesopotamia, Iran, Syria, and Anatolia. The pattern is broad and ancient. Tokens existed long before the earliest full tablets. Their use changed over time, becoming more standardized in some regions and more closely linked to administration. Yet the final leap toward writing required a particular intensity. It required dense cities, expanding institutions, and a need to manage flows of goods too large for oral memory. This is where the mystery sharpens. Human beings had symbolic minds for tens of thousands of years. They painted caves, buried the dead, carved figurines, made ornaments, tracked the heavens, and remembered landscapes through story. The capacity for symbol was ancient. The invention of writing was not caused by a sudden change in intelligence. The people who made it were not awakening from darkness. They were adapting ancient minds to a new social machine. Writing came when the pressures of the city demanded a memory that could not sleep. The counting stones speak of this forgotten pressure. They tell us that the first written signs did not begin as free-floating art, but as solutions to real problems. They emerged where barley had to be measured, sheep had to be assigned, beer had to be rationed, fields had to be supervised, and temple property had to be protected. They reveal a world where trust was no longer enough without verification, where memory needed witnesses, and where clay could become more reliable than the human tongue. Yet there is beauty here, quiet and severe. The little tokens, sealed envelopes, and impressed marks show humanity learning to separate meaning from the thing itself. A shape could become a number could become an obligation could become a record could become a text, and from texts would come histories, laments, laws, spells, hymns, and the deep voice of civilization speaking across time. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath the dust of ruined storehouses and forgotten temple floors. Perhaps more envelopes will be found unbroken, their hidden counters still sleeping inside. Perhaps new analysis will refine the sequence by which signs replaced objects. For now, the evidence remains scattered but eloquent. Before the first written language could name the gods, it had to count their sheep. Beneath the heat-hazed plains of southern Mesopotamia lies one of the great buried thresholds of the human story. It is the city of Uruk, immense, layered, and half-silent, a place where mud-brick walls have collapsed into the earth that made them, where temple platforms have sunk beneath wind-blown dust, and where the earliest written signs were found in the depths of a city that had grown too vast for memory to govern unaided. Uruk was not a quiet settlement of farmers gathered around a few fields. It was a roaring experiment in density. Its streets, courtyards, workshops, shrines, and storehouses formed a living body unlike anything that had come before in the region. The city breathed through canals. It fed itself through hinterlands of barley fields, orchards, marshlands, and grazing grounds. It drew in labour, craft, animals, reeds, wool, bitumen, timber, shell, metal, and stone from landscapes near and far. In its temples, the sacred and the practical stood side by side. Offerings passed through storerooms, rations passed through hands, authority passed through ritual. The discovery of the early tablets at Uruk was not the dramatic finding of a single golden treasure. It was something more patient, more scholarly, and in many ways more profound. Archaeologists working through the layered remains of the site uncovered tablets in ancient debris, often broken, often worn, often difficult to interpret. They appeared in levels associated with the late 4th millennium before the Common Era, in the great expansion of urban life. Stratigraphic excavation revealed that these tablets belonged to a particular world of architecture, administration, and sacred economy. They were not random objects. They were part of the machinery of a city. To imagine the archaeologist's moment, do not picture a glittering crown lifted into sunlight. Picture instead a small clay fragment emerging from soil the colour of old ash. A handbrush clears dust from its surface. There are marks upon it, shallow and angular, some formed by impression, others by incision. They may at first seem plain, but plain things often carry the deepest revolutions. The fragment is lifted, labelled, compared, drawn, photographed, and preserved. Only slowly does its significance unfold. This is not decoration. This is not a casual scratch. It is record. It is information surviving across 5,000 years. Uruk's tablets revealed a civilization wrestling with scale. A village elder can remember who borrowed a tool, whose sheep wandered into whose field, and how much grain a neighbour promised after harvest. A city cannot. A city requires systems. It requires offices, standard measures, trained specialists, sealed containers, stored goods, and recognised procedures. It requires a memory greater than any single human mind. Writing was one answer to this problem, and Uruk was one of the places where that answer became visible. The signs on the earliest tablets were not yet the later flowing discipline of mature cuneiform. They belonged to a more experimental world. Some signs were pictographic, suggestive of heads, vessels, animals, plants, tools, or numerical forms. Others were already abstract, their original images uncertain or lost. They were arranged in compartments, boxes, and sequences, often combined with numerical signs. Many tablets dealt with commodities, workers, livestock, and institutional property. The clay did not sing openly of kings and heroes. It spoke in quantities, categories, and obligations. And yet, there is drama in such dryness. A list of barley is not merely a list of barley when it is one of the earliest known attempts to make human affairs durable. A ration account is not merely a ration account when it shows that a city had learned to divide labour, measure food, and preserve command outside the living voice. An administrative tablet may look dull beside a myth, but without it, myth itself might never have reached the written world. The storehouse came before the library. The ledger cleared the path for the epic. Uruk's growth demanded a new kind of person. Not only farmer, potter, herder, fisher, builder, or priest, but scribe. At first, this figure may have been less a literary scholar than a trained administrator, someone able to understand signs, quantities, commodities, and institutional procedures. The scribe stood at the crossing point between hand and state, between clay and authority, between the spoken command and the silent record. His craft required discipline. The sign had to be recognizable. The number had to be correct. The tablet had to be made, used, stored, and understood by others. This is where the city itself becomes part of the invention. Writing did not appear in isolation. It emerged within a complete environment of clay tablets, reed tools, seal impressions, storage jars, temple offices, labour systems, and shared conventions. A sign means little unless others can read it. A record matters only if someone recognises its authority. Uruk supplied the social world in which writing could function. It was the stage, the pressure chamber, and the echoing archive. Modern study of Uruk has combined excavation, tablet analysis, architectural reconstruction, ceramic typology, and environmental research to understand how this urban world operated. The city's mud brick temples and monumental precincts suggest organised labour on a remarkable scale. Its material culture points to craft specialisation and far-reaching exchange. Its tablets reveal systems of management that were already complex when writing first becomes visible. Each layer of evidence deepens the mystery. The invention of writing was not only a mental breakthrough, it was an institutional event. Stand in the imagination among the ruins at dusk. The desert wind moves across the broken surface of the mound. What was once a city of noise becomes a landscape of silence. No canal traffic passes. No temple bell or shouted order rises into the air. No official waits with damp clay beside a storeroom door. Yet beneath the dust lie the marks of a civilization that forced memory into matter. Uruk did not merely use writing. Uruk needed writing. That need is the revelation. For when a society becomes too intricate for speech alone, it must either simplify or create new instruments of order. Uruk created one of the most powerful instruments ever known. It pressed meaning into clay, and from that act grew the possibility of archives, schools, laws, or royal inscriptions, sacred hymns, mathematical tables, medical observations, omens, myths, laments, and letters. The first signs were modest, but their future was immeasurable. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know the name of the first person who pressed a sign into a tablet at Uruk. We do not know whether that person sensed the magnitude of the act. We do not know whether the first readers regarded these marks as miraculous, tedious, useful, sacred, or merely necessary. The tablets give us evidence, but not the full breadth of the people who made them, so Uruk remains both discovery and riddle, a city buried beneath its own ruins, a place where clay learned to remember, a place where humanity crossed from voice into text, not through thunder, but through administration, repetition, pressure, and trust. Its buried revelation is that writing was not born separate from life. It was born in the crowded heart of life, where gods received offerings, workers received rations, and the city demanded a memory that would not die. In the deep cities of Sumer, power did not first announce itself with iron swords or marching armies. It moved through courtyards, storerooms, offering tables, granaries, and sealed doors. It lived in baskets of barley, jars of oil, folded textiles, herds of sheep, and the careful distribution of bread and beer. It wore the calm face of ritual. It spoke in the name of the gods, and slowly, almost invisibly, it created a world in which the written sign became necessary. The temple was not only a sacred building, it was an economic heart. Its whitewashed walls rose above the surrounding settlement as a visible bridge between earth and heaven. But beneath its sacred shadow worked a vast practical system. Fields had to be cultivated, herds had to be supervised, fish had to be brought from marshes, wool had to be collected, cleaned, spun, woven, stored, and redistributed. Offerings had to be prepared for divine statues. Priests, attendants, musicians, labourers, and dependents. The god's household was not a metaphor, it was an institution. Within this sacred household, memory became labour. A priest might stand before a shrine and pour libations in the dimness, while nearby an administrator counted measures of grain by lamplight. A singer might lift a hymn in the temple court, while a scribe pressed signs into clay to record the allocation of flour. A butcher might prepare animals for sacrifice, while another official noted the kind, number, and destination of livestock. Religion and accounting did not belong to separate worlds. They touched constantly. The divine order required earthly management, and earthly management borrowed the authority of the divine. This is one of the most fascinating revelations of the earliest Sumerian texts. They suggest that writing grew not simply from commerce in an open market, but from institutions that claimed sacred importance. The temple needed records because the temple gathered wealth. It controlled land. It employed workers. It received offerings. It redistributed food. It coordinated labour across seasons and distances. The first scribes were not poets dreaming alone under the stars. They were servants of organised power, working within a system where gods, grain and authority were woven together. Imagine a dawn in Sumer, when the air is still cool and the flat land waits beneath a pale sky. Workers approach the temple precinct with baskets on their shoulders. Donkeys stand tethered near a gateway. Reed mats are rolled aside. Inside, sealed rooms are opened. The smell of clay, beer, wool, and smoke gathers in the corridors. An official receives the day's deliveries. Another checks the marks on containers. A scribe forms a tablet from wet clay, smoothing it with the heel of his hand. The reed stylus enters the clay. A quantity is marked, a commodity is named, a transaction becomes part of an institutional memory. Here, writing served control, but not control in a crude sense alone. It also served continuity. It helped preserve obligations from day to day and season to season. It allowed one official to understand what another had recorded. It made possible systems that outlived individual memory. The temple could plan because the temple could remember. It could demand because it could prove. It could redistribute because it could count. Clay became the nervous system of sacred administration. The people who shaped this world understood hierarchy, but they also understood dependence. A temple without fields had no offerings. A field without labour had no harvest. Labour without rations could not endure. Rations without records could become conflict. Records without recognised authority could become meaningless. Every part depended on the others. Writing entered this web as a stabilising force, a means by which the flow of goods could be made visible and repeatable. The rise of the scribe was therefore a quiet, social revolution. To write was to stand close to power. The scribe knew signs that others did not. He knew categories, measures, commodities, names, and procedures. He could preserve a debt or release a ration. He could attach a person to an obligation. He could make a decision visible to people absent from the moment of decision. Writing did not merely reflect society. It changed the distribution of knowledge within society. A spoken command is strong when the commander is present. A written record travels beyond the body. It can sit in a storeroom, cross a courtyard, remain in an archive, or be consulted when memory fails. This gave institutions a new kind of reach. The temple official no longer needed to personally remember every measure of barley or every allocation of wool. The tablet could carry memory for him. The sign could make authority durable. And yet there is a human cost hidden beneath the administrative calm. Early records of rations and labour hint at organised workforces, dependent personnel, and carefully measured survival. Men, women, and children could be listed according to function and allotted food according to status, task, or age. Behind every number there was a body. Behind every ration there was hunger, labour, heat, fatigue, and the rhythm of daily obligation. The tablet does not weep, it records. But the listener must imagine the lives that move behind the signs. This is where the earliest written language becomes more than a technical achievement. It becomes a mirror of society. It shows us not only that people could write, but what they first chose or were compelled to write about. They wrote about grain because grain sustained cities. They wrote about sheep because wool clothed bodies and filled workshops. They wrote about beer because beer was food, wage, ritual substance, and daily comfort. They wrote about offerings because the gods stood at the centre of order. They wrote about labour because monumental life required human effort organised at scale. The temple storehouse was therefore a place of transformation. Goods entered as physical things. Through counting, sealing, and writing, they became information. A jar of oil was not only oil, it was a recorded unit within a larger system. A flock was not only animals moving across dusty ground. It was an entry, an obligation, a resource tied to an institution. The world did not lose its material reality, but it acquired a second existence in signs. Such a development challenges a familiar dream about the birth of writing. We may wish to imagine the first text as a beautiful hymn to the dawn, a king's solemn declaration, or a mother's message to a distant child. The truth is more severe, and perhaps more powerful. The first written signs seem to arise from the need to manage abundance, scarcity, duty, and sacred property. From this practical beginning came the possibility of everything else. The ledger was the seed of literature. The ration list was the ancestor of philosophy. The storehouse tablet opened the path to myth. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know the voices of the lowest workers whose lives appear only through numbers. We do not know how many people could understand the tablets when they were made. We do not know whether the scribes felt pride, boredom, fear, devotion, or all of these at once. The clay gives evidence, but rarely confession, yet its message is unmistakable. In Sumer, writing became powerful because institutions needed memory, and because sacred authority gave that memory weight. Priests, scribes, and storehouses together shaped the first visible language of civilization. Their world was made of mud brick, reeds, sweat, incense, and grain dust. In that world, the gods received offerings, Mortals received rations, and clay learned to hold them all in order. The revolution began with a reed, not with bronze, not with marble, not with the roar of a battlefield, but with a cut stem gathered from the marshes where the rivers spread into shimmering beds of green. Southern Mesopotamia was a land of reeds. They grew in dense walls along canals, marsh edges, and slow water, whispering in the wind, sheltering birds, feeding animals, roofing houses, shaping boats, baskets, mats, pens, and flutes. To the people of Sumer, the reed was not a humble plant. It was part of the architecture of daily life. From this living material came the stylus. A reed stylus was simple, light, and easily replaced. Its end could be cut, shaped, sharpened, flattened, or angled. When pressed into wet clay, it left a mark unlike the drawn line of a brush or the scratched line of a knife. It made an impression. It entered the soft surface, displaced the clay, and created a small wedge. That wedge, repeated and arranged, became one of the most recognizable visual systems in human history. This is why the word cuneiform matters. It refers not to a language, but to a method of marking. The wedge-shaped sign could carry Sumerian, Akkadian, Hittite, Elamite, and other languages across centuries. The script became a tool that outlived the first tongue that shaped it. Yet in its earliest Sumerian setting, the transformation from drawn images to impressed wedges was an event of enormous consequence. It changed not only how signs looked, but how writing could be produced, copied, standardized, and taught. Picture the scribe at work. He sits in a shaded room near a storeroom or courtyard, the air warm and faintly dusty. A lump of clay has been kneaded and flattened into a tablet. It must be moist enough to receive marks, firm enough not to collapse, smooth enough to make the signs legible. The scribe holds the stylus between his fingers. He does not carve slowly. He presses, turns, presses again. A vertical wedge, a horizontal wedge, an angled wedge. A small group of impressions becomes a sign. A cluster of signs becomes a record. The hand learns rhythm. Writing in clay is physical in a way that modern reading can easily forget. The scribe must control pressure, angle, spacing, and sequence. Too soft a tablet may smear. Too dry a tablet may crack. A careless stroke may confuse one sign with another. The craft depends on touch. It depends on the tiny intelligence of fingertips, wrist, breath, and trained habit. Ancient writing was not an abstract idea floating above the world. It was a performance in matter. Experimental archaeology has helped reveal the practical demands of this craft. When modern researchers recreate tablets and styluses, they learn that clay resists and cooperates according to moisture, grain, and preparation. A reed cut at one angle produces a different mark from a reed cut at another. A sign that looks effortless on a museum tablet may require repeated practice to form cleanly. The surviving tablets are therefore not merely texts. They are fossilized gestures. Each wedge preserves a moment of pressure from a vanished hand. Clay itself was a perfect partner for the invention. In a land where stone was scarce and expensive, mud was everywhere. River silt could be shaped into bricks, sealed into jars, modelled into figurines, and pressed into tablets. For temporary use, tablets could be dried and perhaps discarded. For permanence, accident or intention could harden them by fire. A document made for administration could survive destruction when a building burned around it. The catastrophe that ended a room might preserve its records for thousands of years. There is a strange irony here. Fragility became endurance. Clay, while wet, was vulnerable to every finger. Clay, when baked, could outlast wood, leather, papyrus, and memory. The first written language found its body in the most ordinary substance of the Mesopotamian plain, and that body proved astonishingly faithful. The shift to wedge impressions also encouraged abstraction. Early signs that may once have resembled objects gradually became more schematic. A head was no longer drawn as a head in any natural sense. A vessel no longer needed to look like a vessel. The sign became a convention. This allowed writing to move away from picture and towards system. It also allowed scribes to write more quickly. speed and mattered in a world of accounts, lists, labels, and repeated categories. The reed stylus did not merely record writing, it reshaped writing according to its own possibilities. Material culture surrounds this transformation. Tablets were not alone. They belonged among seals, bully, jars, counters, measuring vessels, baskets, and storehouses. A sealed jar, a tagged bundle, and a clay tablet could all participate in the same administrative universe. The writing system grew through contact with objects. It was practical, tactile, and embedded in routines. The scribe stylus was one instrument in a wider orchestra of control, memory, and distribution. Lithic analysis, although often associated with stone tools from much earlier periods, reminds us to study technology through manufacture, use wear, and material choice. In the Sumerian world, the important tool was not usually stone, but the same principles apply. How was the writing implement shaped? What marks did it leave? How did repeated use affect its tip? What physical habits did it encourage? Such questions bring us close to the craft itself. They let us see writing not as a miracle without mechanics, but as a technology with a body. Yet the body of the technology did not diminish its mystery, quite the opposite. The more closely one studies the reed, the clay, and the hand, the more astonishing the achievement becomes. Human beings turned pressure into meaning. They discovered that a small angled mark could stand for grain, labour, sound, divinity, office, place, or number. They created a visual discipline capable of carrying the weight of civilization, and they did so with river mud and marsh reed. Imagine a pile of fresh tablets drying in the heat. Some record ordinary distributions, some may be practice exercises, some are mistakes, smoothed over and rewritten. The sun moves slowly across the courtyard. Flies gather near beer jars. Somewhere nearby, a worker curses under his breath. A child laughs. A priest chants. An animal cries from a tether. The tablets remain silent, but each one is full of the pressures of that day. The reed has touched them. The city has entered them. In time, the wedge would become familiar across a vast world. It would travel through conquest, trade, diplomacy, and schooling. It would be used for royal boasts, treaties, astronomical observations, legal decisions, medical recipes, omens, myths, and laments. But at its heart remained that ancient encounter between stylus and clay. The wedge never forgot its origin in touch. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We cannot hear the first lesson given to a young scribe. We cannot know who first realized that pressing was faster than drawing. We cannot name the artisan who cut the stylus in just the right way and changed the visual future of writing. The evidence lies in marks, not confessions. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made in the dust of old tablets and the microscopic traces of ancient tools. But the message already pressed into the clay is clear. The first written language was not only born from thought, it was born from material genius. It required a plant, a river, a hand, and a surface willing to remember. To read the earlier signs of Sumer is to stand before a locked door whose key was broken long ago. The clay remains, the marks remain. The tablets sit under glass or rest in drawers, numbered, catalogued, photographed, and studied beneath careful light. Yet the mind behind them does not step forward easily. A sign may be visible, clear in its shape, sharp in its impression, and still refuse to surrender its full meaning. This is the great challenge of the first written language. Writing is not only marks, writing is agreement. Writing is sound, memory, training, habit, and social permission gathered into visible form. When the community that understood those signs disappears, the tablet becomes a kind of night sky. The stars are present, but the old constellations must be learned again. The earlier Sumerian texts do not offer long explanations of themselves. They do not begin with a statement saying, "This is how our language works." They are mostly practical, compressed, and formulaic. A quantity, a commodity, a name, a place, an official, a transaction. They were made for people who already knew the system, not for strangers born 5,000 years later. For modern scholars, every tablet is therefore both evidence and problem. It must be read through comparison, repetition, context, and patience. The first task is to separate sign from language. A picture of a sheep can be understood without knowing how to say sheep in the speech of its maker. A number can be recognized as quantity, even when the words around it are uncertain. Many early signs functioned in this way. They pointed to things, categories, and administrative realities. But the deeper question is more difficult. At what point did the signs begin to represent not only objects and ideas, but the sounds of a spoken language? This question is where Sumerian emerges from the clay. Sumerian is unlike the Semitic languages that later surrounded and absorbed it. It is not Akkadian. It is not Hebrew. It is not Aramaic. It stands apart, a language isolate, with no universally accepted family connection. Its structure is distinctive, its grammar intricate, its verbal forms dense with meaning. The language preserved in later tablets allows scholars to look backward toward the earlier signs, but the path is uneven. The further one descends into the earliest phases, the more uncertain the ground becomes. Sumerian writing did not begin as a perfect mirror of speech. It grew into that power. At first, signs could serve as labels, categories, and accounting tools. Then they gained phonetic uses. A sign associated with a word could be used for its sound, even in another context. This was one of the grand intellectual breakthroughs in the history of writing. A mark no longer had to represent only the thing it pictured. It could represent the sound of the word for that thing. Once sound entered the system, writing began to approach the spoken world more closely. Consider the wonder of this shift. A sign for an object can record that object. A sign for a sound can record anything that sound helps form. The horizon expands. Names become easier to write. Grammar can be hinted at. Abstract ideas can be captured with greater flexibility. The clay surface becomes not only a warehouse of goods, but a field where speech itself leaves traces. Yet the transformation was gradual. The early system remained mixed. It used logograms, signs standing for whole words or ideas. It used numerical signs. It used signs in ways that scholars continue to debate. Some marks may represent commodities. Some may mark professions. Some may be personal names. Some may be titles attached to institutions. In many cases, the tablet speaks in a code that was obvious to its makers and obscure to us. Decipherment required generations of labour. Scholars compared bilingual texts, later lexical lists, royal inscriptions, school tablets, and administrative records. They studied sign forms as they changed through time, noting how pictures became wedges and how wedges became standardized. They observed repeated combinations. They watched where signs appeared on tablets and which numbers accompanied them. They traced grammar through later texts where Sumerian was taught, copied, and preserved even when it had ceased to be the language of ordinary daily speech. This is scholarship as excavation of meaning, not only spades in soil, but eyes moving across signs, not only broken walls and pottery layers, but patterns in grammar, sound, and scribal habit. The decipherer works like a traveller in fog, moving from certainty to probability, from probability to doubt, and from doubt back to the tablet. There is dignity in this uncertainty. Ancient writing should not be forced to speak faster than it can. The clay must be allowed its silence. Some signs are clear, some are contested, some are ghosts whose outlines are known but whose voices remain faint. Still, even partial understanding is extraordinary. We can see the structure of administration, we can identify divine names, we can recognize cities, professions, goods, offerings, and human names. We can watch writing grow from counting into language. The earliest scribes did not think in modern categories. They did not divide their world neatly into economics, religion, politics, and literature. For them, a sheep could be an offering, a temple asset, a ration source, a sign in a list, and a creature beneath the care of a god. A name could be personal, social, administrative as in sacred. A tablet could be practical and yet belong to a divine order. The signs carried this layered reality. The language behind the marks also reminds us that writing is never innocent. To record speech is to choose what deserves survival. The early tablets preserve the concerns of institutions more clearly than the private dreams of shepherds or the whispered grief of mothers. They show what organised power needed to know. But through their narrow openings, ordinary lives still appear. A worker receives grain, a brewer delivers beer, a herder is counted with animals, a field yields its measure. A name survives because bureaucracy required it. In those names, the ancient world becomes suddenly intimate, not as legend, not as marble, not as myth, but as a person caught in a system of signs. Someone lived, laboured, owed, received, carried, counted, or gave. The tablet preserved a trace because the city had reason to remember. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know the first spoken sentence ever successfully written in Sumerian. We do not know how early readers sounded the signs in their minds. We do not know whether they felt the strangeness of seeing speech made still. We cannot sit beside a master scribe and hear him explain why one sign must be read one way in one place and another way elsewhere. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made, what fragments may be joined, what signs may be clarified, what hidden archive may rise from beneath the dust. For now, the language behind the marks remains both revealed and concealed. It speaks enough to astonish us and withholds enough to keep us humble. The miracle is not that the clay tells us everything. The miracle is that it tells us anything at all. In the cities of Sumer, the written sign did not rise in an empty world. It rose beneath the gaze of gods. The people who pressed the earliest marks into clay inhabited a landscape alive with invisible powers. The river was not merely water, the storm was not merely weather, the field was not merely soil, the shining sky, the dangerous flood, the ripening barley, the city wall, the temple doorway, the birth of a child, the illness of a king, the cry of birds over the marsh, all belong to a universe thick with intention. The divine was not distant. It pressed upon a daily life as closely as heat, hunger, and dust. To understand the first written language, one must enter this sacred atmosphere. Writing did not develop only among merchants weighing goods or officials counting workers. It developed in a civilization where temples stood at the center of economic, political, and spiritual life. The earliest texts carry the names of deities, offerings, sanctuaries, and sacred obligations. They suggest that writing helped organize not merely property, but the relationship between mortals and the unseen powers believed to govern existence. The temple was the house of a god. This idea must be taken seriously. It was not simply a place where people gathered to think about divinity. It was imagined as a dwelling, a household, a center of presence. The god had lands, the god had stores, the god had servants, the god received food, drink, garments, music, incense, animals, and praise. The god's statue had to be adorned, approached, fed, honoured, and protected. A sacred economy formed around this divine household, and writing became one of its instruments. Picture a morning ritual in a Sumerian city. The first light spreads across mud brick roofs and temple terraces. Smoke rises from hearths. Water glimmers in canals. Within the holy precinct, attendants prepare offerings. Bread is stacked, beer is poured, oil is measured, woolen garments are folded, animals are selected. The god does not visibly eat as mortals eat, yet the offering must still be correct. It must be accounted for. It must be repeated according to custom. It must enter the order of the world. A spoken promise to a god was powerful, but a written record gave that promise duration. Clay could preserve the movement of sacred goods. It could say that a measure of grain had been given, that a jar of oil had been allocated, that animals had entered the divine household, that labour had been assigned for temple service. Writing served the gods by serving the system through which the gods were honoured. Here lies one of the great paradigm-breaking possibilities. Civilization may not have been driven only by hunger, irrigation, and defence. It may also have been driven by ritual. The need to gather, build, offer, remember, and serve the sacred may have helped pull people into larger institutions. Religion was not a decorative layer placed upon society after practical life had been arranged. It may have been one of the engines that made large-scale order imaginable. The earliest written signs do not give us theology in the later literary sense. They do not yet unfold grand hymns of creation in polished lines. Yet divine names and sacred contexts appear within the administrative world. This is important. It shows that the sacred was already embedded in the first habits of writing. The clay tablet was not always a prayer, but it could belong to a sacred system. The list of offerings may seem dry to modern eyes, yet to the Sumerians it participated in cosmic maintenance. For them, order had to be made and remade. Flood, drought, disease, failed harvest, social conflict, and foreign attack were not abstractions. They were threats felt in the body. The gods could bless, abandon, rage, or demand. Cities lived under divine patronage. A city's identity was bound to its god, its temple, and the rituals that sustained that bond. To record offerings was to take part in the fragile negotiation between human community and divine power. Writing also gave divine names a new kind of presence. A name spoken aloud vanishes into air. A name impressed in clay remains. To write the name of a god was not a neutral act. In many ancient cultures, names carried force. They were not mere labels, but connections to essence, authority, and memory. When a divine name entered the tablet, the god entered the world of signs. The sacred became visible, repeatable, and stored. This changed the nature of religious memory. Ritual knowledge could be transmitted more reliably. Lists of offerings, temple personnel, festivals, cult objects, and divine households could be preserved and consulted. The sacred order could reach across time through written practice. Priests and administrators could use clay to stabilize what tradition demanded. The tablet became a quiet guardian of correct performance. Yet writing did more than preserve ritual. It shaped ritual thought. A list imposes order. It divides the world into categories. It says that one thing belongs here, another there. It turns flowing life into structured sequence. When temple goods were recorded, the divine household became legible in a new way. The god's possessions could be counted. The god's servants could be classified. The god's offerings could be scheduled. The sacred became administrative, and administration became sacred. There is a deep tension in this. The divine was immeasurable, yet its earthly service required measurement. The god exceeded all human grasp, yet the god's barley could be counted. The temple opened toward heaven, yet its storerooms required seals. The sacred fire burned beyond ordinary life, yet someone had to note how much oil had been used. Sumerian writing grew in this tension between mystery and management. The scribes who recorded temple life may have seen no contradiction. Their world was not divided between spiritual and practical. A correct measure, a proper offering, a sealed container, and a divine hymn all belonged to the maintenance of order. The reed stylus served this order as surely as the priest's vessel or the farmer's plough. To press a sign into clay was to help hold the world steady. The earliest texts therefore reveal more than the birth of literacy. They reveal a civilization trying to make permanence in a universe of uncertainty. The rivers shifted. Fields turned salty, storms destroyed roofs, bodies failed, kings died, workers forgot, but the tablet could remain. It could preserve a record in the presence of gods and mortals alike. It could give form to obligation, and obligation was at the heart of worship. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know what prayers passed through the lips of the first scribes while they wrote divine names. We do not know whether the act of writing seemed sacred in itself, or simply useful within sacred walls. We do not know how many signs once pointed toward rituals now lost without trace. The clay gives fragments, not the full music, and yet the fragments are enough to open a solemn vision. In Sumer, writing did not begin as a cold machine separate from wonder. It emerged among offerings, storehouses, temples, and gods who demanded remembrance. It turned sacred duty into durable form. It made the invisible order visible in clay. The first written language was therefore not merely a tool for counting the world. It was a way of placing the world beneath divine order. Grain, sheep, oil, labour, names, shrines, and gods entered the tablet together. From these small records rose the possibility that human beings could speak not only to one another across time, but to the powers they believed shaped time itself. In the cities of ancient Sumer, writing became a craft that had to be learned with pain, patience, and repetition. The signs did not pass naturally from one generation to another, like speech heard at a mother's knee. They demanded training. They demanded discipline of the hand, discipline of the eye, and discipline of memory. A child could learn to speak by living among voices, but no child learned the full world of tablets without instruction. So there arose the tablet house. It was not a school in the modern sense, with bright rooms, printed books, and gentle hours divided by bells. It was a place of clay dust, strict correction, murmured recitation, and aching fingers. The young student sat with damp tablets and a reed stylus, facing signs that seemed at first like a forest of wedges. Every mark had to be copied, every line had to be remembered, every error left a visible scar in the clay. The Sumerian name, often translated as tablet house, suggests the nature of the institution. It was a house where clay was made into knowledge. In such rooms, the future scribes of cities, temples, palaces, workshops, and courts were shaped. They learned not only how to write signs, but how to enter an elite mental world. To become a scribe was to cross a boundary. It was to gain access to the stored memory of institutions, to measures, titles, legal formulas, sacred lists, literary phrases, and the ordered knowledge of civilization. Imagine the morning inside such a school. The air is already warm. A master sits near the front, stern and practiced. Older students may assist younger ones. Clay tablets are prepared, their surfaces smoothed by wet hands. The room smells of earth, sweat, reed, and smoke from nearby hearths. Outside, the city moves in its usual rhythm, animals calling, workers shouting, water creaking through channels. Inside, the students bend over signs. They copy lists. Lists were among the great instruments of scribal education. At first glance, this may seem dull. Lists of signs, lists of words, lists of animals, trees, vessels, stones, professions, cities, gods, and objects. Yet these lists were intellectual architecture. They arranged the world into categories. They trained the student to see reality as something that could be ordered, divided, named, and preserved. A list is not merely a collection. It is a way of thinking. To copy a list of professions was to learn the structure of society. To copy a list of gods was to learn the sacred hierarchy. To copy a list of animals and plants was to learn the world of fields, marshes, steppe, and storehouse. To copy signs again and again was to move from seeing marks as strange forms to recognizing them as a living system. Repetition turned confusion into fluency. The tablet house made memory visible. A student might receive a model tablet from the teacher. On one side, the master's text was carefully written. On the other, the student copied it. The difference between skill and inexperience remained plain. The master's wedges were clean, balanced, and confident. The students might be uneven or cramped, tilted, or pressed too deeply into the clay. The tablet itself became a lesson and a judgment. Education was not always gentle. Later scribal texts speak of strict discipline, of students fearing punishment, of masters correcting laziness, lateness, poor handwriting, and failure to recite. Even if some of these accounts were stylized, they carry the mood of a difficult training. The scribal path required endurance. The reward was status. The cost was submission to a demanding tradition. For the student, the signs were more than marks. They were doors into power. A scribe could serve a temple, palace, governor, merchant, or legal authority. He could draft contracts, record land transfers, calculate rations, copy hymns, preserve proverbs, and write letters. The world of clay opened practical careers, but it also opened a deeper inheritance. Through schooling, the old language, old texts, and old categories survived even as daily life changed around them. The tablet house also helped preserve Sumerian long after speech itself shifted in the streets. Languages can die in the mouth and still live in schools. Sumerian became a language of learning, prestige, ritual, and scribal identity. Students copied it because tradition required it, because institutions honoured it, and because the tablets of the past had made it powerful. This is one of history's strangest forms of afterlife. A language no longer spoken by ordinary people can remain alive in the hand of a student. In such classrooms, grammar became discipline. Signs could have multiple values. Words could change form. A single sign might represent a whole word, a sound, or an idea depending on context. The student had to learn these possibilities not as theory alone, but through practice. The complexity was part of the craft. To read and write well was to master ambiguity without being destroyed by it. Proverbs also entered the school. They brought wit, caution, social wisdom, and moral instruction into the scribal world. A short saying could teach humility, obedience, cleverness, and the dangers of pride. These brief texts remind us that education was not merely technical, it shaped conduct. The student was trained to become a particular kind of person, disciplined, useful, loyal to hierarchy, and capable of carrying tradition forward. There is something deeply human in the surviving school tablets. Some are neat, some are clumsy, some show mistakes, some preserve half-learned signs from hands still finding their skill. These tablets bring us close not to kings or gods, but to learners. We can almost see the young scribe pressing too hard, hesitating, correcting, repeating. His frustration is not so distant from the frustration of any student facing a difficult lesson. Across 5,000 years, the schoolroom remains recognizable, yet the tablet house was also a filter. It did not open equally to all. Scribal education required time, resources, and social connection. Many who built the cities, harvested the grain, carried the clay, wove the wool, brewed the beer, and served the temple never entered the world of writing as masters of it. Their lives might appear on tablets, but usually through the pens of others. Writing empowered civilization, but it also separated those who recorded from those who were recorded. This separation gave scribes a special authority. The written sign could outlast memory, and the scribe knew how to make that endurance happen. He could transform speech into record and record into institutional truth. His training made him valuable, but also dangerous. A society that depends on writing depends on those who control writing. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know the names of most children who sat in those rooms. We do not know how many loved the craft, how many hated it, how many dreamed of escaping into the streets and canals beyond the school walls. We do not know the voice of the teacher correcting a crooked sign, or the small private triumph of a student who finally mastered a difficult tablet, but the clay preserves enough. It shows us that the first written language became civilization's memory only because human beings built institutions to teach it. The tablet house turned signs into tradition. It turned children into scribes. It turned the lists into knowledge and repetition into power. In those dim rooms of clay and reed, thought itself was trained to endure. There comes a moment in the life of every ruler when victory is not enough. A battle can be won and forgotten. A city can be taken and rebuilt by another hand. A canal can be dug. A wall can be raised. A rival can be defeated. And still the flesh of the king returns to dust. Power burns brightly, but the human body is brief. In Sumer, the rulers who governed city-states beneath the vast Mesopotamian sky faced the same ancient terror that haunts every throne. How could a mortal command time itself? Writing offered an answer. At first, the written sign served grain, livestock, labour, offerings, and storehouses. But rulers soon discovered that clay and stone could do more than count goods. They could preserve glory. They could make command visible. They could carry a name beyond death. A king who ordered words to be impressed, carved, copied, and stored was no longer dependent only on songs, witnesses, or the fragile loyalty of living memory. His deeds could stand before future eyes, silent but insistent. This was one of the most powerful transformations in the history of authority. Writing became a weapon against oblivion. In the cities of Sumer, kingship itself was complex. The ruler was not merely a warrior, he was guardian of the city, servant of the city's god. builder of temples, organizer of labor, judge of disputes, protector of fields, and symbol of collective survival. His legitimacy had to be demonstrated again and again. He had to show that the gods favored him, that the canals flowed under his care, that enemies fell before his strength, that temples rose through his devotion, and that order endured because he stood at its center. The royal inscription allowed all of this to be shaped into memory. Picture a ruler standing before a newly built temple platform. The bricks are fresh. The plaster is bright beneath the sun. Workers have spent seasons hauling mud, moulding bricks, setting courses, lifting loads, and smoothing walls. Priests prepare the dedication. Musicians stand ready. Offerings are brought forward, somewhere nearby. A scribe has prepared the words that will join the building to the king's name. The inscription may name the ruler, his father, his city, his god, and the sacred structure he has built or restored. It may ask future rulers to honor the work rather than destroy it. It may place a curse upon anyone who erases the name. Such words reveal a profound anxiety. To erase a name was to wound existence. To preserve a name was to grant a kind of afterlife. The king knew that walls would crack, dynasties would fail, and enemies would come. He knew that memory could be stolen, so the inscription became both declaration and plea. It said, "I was here. I served the god. I built this. Remember me." The material chosen for these messages mattered. Clay was common and useful, but royal memory often sought harder bodies. Stone, metal, and foundation deposits carried statements into hidden or sacred places. Objects could be buried within walls, under thresholds, or beneath temple foundations, where they would not be seen by the public but would wait like messages addressed to gods, descendants, and time itself. A king did not always write for the living crowd. Sometimes he wrote for the future, sometimes he wrote for the divine. This gives royal writing a strange double audience. It speaks outward to subjects and rivals, but also downward into the earth and upward toward heaven. The ruler's name is placed in matter so that human and divine memory may converge. The inscription is public power and sacred offering at once. As city-states competed, the written record became increasingly political. Sumer was not a single peaceful kingdom, but a landscape of rival cities, each with its own patron deity, territory, ambitions and fears. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Umma, Kish, Nippur, and others moved through alliances, conflicts, and claims to status. In such a world, writing could define borders, record disputes, commemorate victories, and justify rule. The tablet and inscription helped transform power into argument. A ruler could claim that the god had granted him authority. He could say he restored justice, built temples, defeated enemies, dug canals, protected widows, or fed the people. Whether every claim was true in the simple sense is not the only question. The deeper point is that writing allowed kingship to present itself as order. Words organized violence into destiny. Words turned construction into piety. Words transformed rule into a story that could be repeated. This was a new kind of immortality, but it was not gentle. Writing preserved the voices of rulers far more often than the voices of those who carried their bricks. The king's name might survive in careful signs, while the labourers remain unnamed. The inscription may praise a temple without recording the strained backs, cracked hands, and dust-filled lungs of the people who built it. Royal writing is therefore both revelation and concealment. It tells us what power wanted remembered, and by doing so, hints at what power allowed to vanish. Yet even this concealment teaches us. A king who needed inscription needed recognition. A ruler who proclaimed justice understood that justice mattered as an ideal. A builder who named his temple works knew that sacred architecture was central to legitimacy. A conqueror who recorded victory knew that triumph was not complete until it entered memory. Writing made power more sophisticated because it made power narrate itself. There is something almost eerie in the survival of these royal names. Men who once walked through incense-filled courtyards, surrounded by attendants, soldiers, priests, and petitioners, now exist for us as signs. Their bodies are gone. Their voices are gone. The cities they ruled are ruins. The gods they served are no longer worshipped in their temples, yet their names remain impressed, carved, copied, and studied. In one sense, their strategy succeeded. They reached across the abyss, but immortality through writing is never complete. The inscription preserves the name, not the breath. It preserves the claim, not the whole soul. A ruler may declare himself beloved by a god, but the tablet does not reveal his private fear in the night. It may record his victory, but not the face of the defeated mother searching among the dead. It may praise his building, but not the worker who collapsed beneath the load. The written monument conquers oblivion only in fragments. Still, those fragments change the human story. Once rulers discovered writing, history became more deliberate. Kings could place themselves inside time. They could speak to successors. They could command future memory. They could threaten anyone who altered their words. They could make their reigns appear as chapters in a sacred order stretching from gods to cities to descendants. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We don't know the first Sumerian ruler who understood, with full clarity, that writing could make a dead man powerful. We don't know which scribe first shaped a king's ambition into a formal inscription. We do not know how ordinary people heard such texts read aloud, whether with awe, indifference, pride, or bitterness. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made beneath temple ruins, foundation deposits, and shattered monuments. But the surviving signs already speak with solemn force. In Sumer, kings learned that clay and stone could hold a name longer than blood could hold life. Writing became a throne beyond the grave, a narrow bridge by which mortal power tried to cross into eternity. From the same clay that counted sheep and grain, another voice eventually rose. It was slower, deeper, and more dangerous. It did not merely ask how much barley entered a storehouse, or which worker received a ration, or which ruler built a temple wall. It asked how the world began. It asked why floods came. It asked why kings sought glory and why death waited at the edge of every feast. It asked what the gods desired from mortals, and what mortals could hope to become beneath the gaze of heaven. The clay had learned to remember accounts. Now it began to remember wonder. In Sumer, myth did not arrive as fantasy separate from life. It was a way of thinking about reality. The gods were not decorative characters placed inside stories for entertainment. They were explanations, presences, powers, and personalities. They shaped the order of cities, seasons, fertility, kingship, storms, disease, and fate. To tell a myth was to approach the hidden structure of existence. To write a myth was to give that approach a durable body. Imagine a scribe seated in the dim light of a tablet house or temple room. Before him lies a tablet larger and more demanding than a simple account. Its surface must hold not only numbers and names, but lines of narrative. The stylus moves in patient rhythm. Sign after sign enters the clay. A god speaks. A king travels. A city mourns. A flood rises. A hero dreams of fame. The act is practical in one sense and but sacred in another. A story that may have once lived in the mouths of singers and elders is being fixed, transformed, and carried into a new kind of survival. The transition from oral tradition to written text was never simple. Stories spoken aloud are fluid. They change with the singer, the audience, the festival, the city, and the mood of the hour. A performer may lengthen a scene, shorten a genealogy, alter an image, or emphasize a local god. But when a story is written, it gains stability. It can be copied. It can be taught. It can travel with fewer changes. It can become authoritative. Yet writing also freezes only one version among many. Behind every written myth there may have been older voices now lost. Variants never recorded. Songs that disappeared when the singers died. The tablet preserves, but it also selects. It rescues one current from a river and lets other waters flow into darkness. Among the most haunting figures carried by Sumerian and later Mesopotamian tradition is the heroic king who sought a name that would not perish. His story would grow, change, and pass through languages. But its roots reach into the old world of Sumerian kingship, divine favour, city pride, and mortal longing. The hero stands at the border between history and myth. He rules a city of walls and temples, yet he walks among monsters, gods, dreams, and impossible quests. He is immense, but not immortal. His greatness makes his death more terrible, not less. This is the enduring power of Mesopotamian myth. It does not pretend that civilization saves humanity from fear. Cities rise, kings rule, temples shine, scribes write, and still the grave waits. The clay tablet itself becomes part of this tension. It outlives the body, yet it speaks constantly of what cannot be kept. A story preserved for thousands of years may tell us that no human life can last forever. The medium defeats oblivion while the message admits defeat. Flood traditions also entered the written world with tremendous force. In the Mesopotamian imagination, water was both giver and destroyer. The rivers made fields fertile, filled canals, fed reeds, and sustained cities. But water could also erase boundaries, drown livestock, collapse mud brick, and sweep away the fragile order mortals had made. To tell of a great flood was to magnify a known terror into cosmic drama. It was memory, theology, and warning bound together. A flood myth speaks to the vulnerability of civilization. Mud brick cities, however grand, remain close to dissolution. Fields can vanish beneath water. Archives can sink into silt. The human order depends on forces beyond its control. In such stories, the gods may decide, rage, regret, or preserve a chosen survivor. Mortals may build, listen, obey, or perish. The myth asks whether survival is earned, granted, or merely endured. Creation stories carried another kind of mystery. They imagined the ordering of the world from primal conditions, the separation of realms, the naming of powers, the establishment of divine authority, and the place of human beings within a cosmos not made for their comfort alone. These stories did not function like modern scientific explanations, but they were not childish. They were philosophical structures expressed through divine drama. They asked why labour exists, why kingship descends from heaven, why cities matter, why ritual sustains order, and why human life is bound to service. The written myth gave these questions form. It allowed scribes to preserve complex sequences of divine action, speeches, repetitions, and symbolic patterns. It also placed myth inside education. Students copied stories not only to enjoy them, but to learn language, tradition, theology, and elite culture. Literature became a training ground for memory and identity. A scribe who copied myths did not merely learn signs. He entered the deep imagination of his civilization. Still, myth on clay is not pure dream. It is marked by the realities of the world that produced it. The temple, the palace, the field, the canal, the floodplain, the workshop, the sheepfold, the court, and the battlefield all leave their shadows in the stories. Gods behave like magnified rulers. Divine households resemble earthly institutions. Cosmic order is imagined through forms familiar from city life. Myth made the universe intelligible by clothing it in the structures people knew. This does not make the myths less profound. It makes them more human. The people of Sumer looked at the world around them and saw more than matter. They saw a vast drama of power, obligation, beauty, danger, and fate. Their stories gave shape to awe. They understood that civilization was a fragile island between chaos and dust. They knew that a king could be mighty and still afraid. They knew that the gods could be generous and terrifying. They knew that wisdom often arrived too late. There is a special silence around the first moment when a story was written down. Did an elder recite while a scribe pressed signs into clay? Did the scribe copy from an older tablet now lost? Did the story belong to temple ritual, courtly entertainment, school exercise, or private devotion? The clay does not answer fully. It leaves us answerless, adrift to ponder the voices behind the signs. Yet the survival of these myths remains one of the grand gifts of ancient writing. Without the tablets, the oldest layers of Mesopotamian imagination would have vanished almost entirely. We would know the cities by their bricks, canals, and graves, but not by the questions that kept them awake at night. The myths allow us to hear thought becoming story, and story becoming memory. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden, many tablets are broken, many lines are missing, many stories surely died before any scribe preserved them. Some survive only in fragments, like torchlight seen through a ruined doorway. But even fragments can illuminate an age, a divine name, a line of lament, a dream, a flood, a hero's fear, all reveal a civilization reaching beyond administration toward meaning. The great stories rose from clay because clay had already become trustworthy. Once it could hold numbers, it could hold names. Once it could hold names, it could hold speech. Once it could hold speech, it could hold the trembling architecture of myth. And in those stories, the first written language ceased to be only a servant of institutions. It became a vessel for the human encounter with mystery. Languages, like cities, can fall silent while their monuments remain standing. Sumerian was once a living tongue. It moved through markets, courtyards, river ports, temple precincts, workshops, and homes. It carried commands, jokes, prayers, insults, lullabies, bargains, and grief. It was heard in the mouths of officials and labourers, priests and mothers, scribes and boatmen, yet no spoken language is protected from time. People migrate, cities change masters, children learn new words from neighbours, conquerors, traders, and administrators. Slowly, almost invisibly, the soundscape of a civilization can alter. In Mesopotamia, another language rose into power besides Sumerian. It was Akkadian, a Semitic language, different in structure and sound, carried by communities whose presence deepened across the region. Akkadian did not simply arrive as a shadow at the gate. It became part of the living world. It entered speech, administration, royal power, diplomacy, and literature. It moved through the same fields, canals, streets, and palace corridors where Sumerian had shaped the earliest written memory. The meeting of Sumerian and Akkadian was not a clean replacement. Like one flame extinguished and another lit in its place. It was a long entanglement. For generations, both languages existed within the same broad cultural world. People may have spoken one language at home, heard another in administration, encountered both in names, titles, rituals, and texts. Scribes learned to move between them. Institutions absorbed them. The clay tablets became a place where linguistic worlds touched. This bilingual world changed writing forever. Cuneiform, born from the pressure of a reed upon clay, proved flexible. It could carry Sumerian signs, but it could also be adapted to write Akkadian. This was not a simple task. Sumerian and Akkadian did not behave alike. They differed in grammar, sound patterns, word formation, and sentence structure. Yet scribes found ways to bend the old system toward the new language. Signs that had once represented Sumerian words could be used for Akkadian syllables. Logograms could stand beside phonetic spellings. A written tradition became a bridge between tongues. There is intellectual daring in this adaptation. To use an inherited script for a different language requires analysis, experimentation, and convention. Scribes had to decide how sounds should be represented, how old signs could serve new purposes, and how readers would be trained to understand the mixture. The result was complex, sometimes heavy, sometimes elegant, and deeply Mesopotamian. Writing became not the property of one language alone, but a shared technology of civilization. As Akkadian rose in daily and political importance, Sumerian gradually retreated from ordinary speech. But retreat is not disappearance. Sumerian became something stranger, and perhaps more powerful than a common spoken language. It became a language of scholarship, ritual, prestige, and ancient authority. It survived in schools, hymns, lexical lists, incantations, temple traditions, and the learned identity of scribes. It became the old voice one studied in order to enter the deepest chambers of Mesopotamian learning. This is one of history's most haunting survivals. A language can die in the street and continue to breathe in the classroom. It can vanish from the daily market yet remain alive on tablets copied by students. It can cease to be the language of ordinary conversation while still carrying sacred hymns and revered literature. Sumerian became a kind of ancestral flame, guarded by scribes who may no longer have spoken it as their first language, yet treated it as a treasure of civilization. Imagine a young student in a later Mesopotamian city, centuries removed from the first urban age of Sumer, outside the school. People speak Akkadian, merchants argue in it, mothers call children in it, officials issue orders in it. Yet inside the tablet house, the student bends over Sumerian signs. He copies words whose sounds may feel ancient even to him. He memorizes lists connecting Sumerian terms with Akkadian equivalents. He learns the old language as a key to temple hymns, real traditions, and scholarly prestige. For such a student, Sumerian was not dead. It was difficult. It was venerable. It was the language of the old tablets, the language of beginnings, the language whose mastery marked him as educated. To know Sumerian was to inherit the authority of deep time. It connected the scribe to the age when writing first took form, when cities first recorded their gods, when kings first placed their names against oblivion. Akkadian did not erase Sumerian. It carried Sumerian with it. Many Akkadian texts used Sumerian logograms, signs read as Akkadian words but written with older Sumerian forms, divine names, technical terms, titles, and learned expressions preserved traces of the older language. The writing system itself became layered, like an archaeological mound. One sign could contain ancient habit, scribal convention, and living pronunciation all at once. The tablet became a meeting place of memory and speech. This layered writing reveals a civilization deeply respectful of textual inheritance. Mesopotamian scribes did not always seek simplicity. They valued continuity. They copied old forms because old forms carried authority. They preserved difficult traditions because difficulty itself could mark sacredness and learning. The past was not discarded as soon as it became inconvenient. It was studied, reorganized, translated, and woven into new worlds. The survival of Sumerian under Akkadian dominance also shows that language and power do not move in only one direction. A politically rising language may rule the palace, while an older language rules the school and shrine. Spoken life may belong to one tongue, ceremonial authority to another. This pattern has appeared many times across human history, yet in Mesopotamia it is among the earliest and most richly documented examples. The first written language became a learned relic while continuing to shape the living empires around it. There is beauty in this, but also melancholy. Every preserved Sumerian school text implies a lost world of natural speech. Every bilingual list is both bridge and tombstone. It teaches the old words because the old words can no longer be assumed. It honours them because they have become distant. The act of preservation reveals the fact of loss. Still, loss did not mean silence. Sumerian continued to speak through hymns, myths, laments, wisdom texts, incantations, and scholarly exercises. It survived because scribes chose to keep copying it. It survived because institutions valued it. It survived because the clay archive had already made it indispensable. In a world where tradition was power, the oldest written language could not simply vanish. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not know the last child who learned Sumerian naturally from a parent's voice. We do not know the last marketplace where Sumerian speech was ordinary. We do not know when people first began to feel that the language of the oldest tablets belonged more to school than to life. Such changes are rarely announced. They pass through generations like dusk across a plain. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made, what tablets may clarify the long twilight of spoken Sumerian, what new analysis may reveal about the people who carried both tongues within one world. For now, the evidence shows a language that refused to disappear in the ordinary way. It yielded the street, but kept the archive. It lost the breath of daily speech, but gained the endurance of sacred memory. In the shadow of Akkadian, Sumerian survived not as a fossil alone, but as a foundation. Its signs, words, stories, and prestige shaped the civilizations that followed. The first written language became ancient even in antiquity, and because it became ancient, it became powerful. The cities of Mesopotamia did not vanish in a single night. They failed, endured, burned, recovered, shifted, and felt silent in different ways across long centuries. A wall might collapse and be rebuilt. A temple might be restored upon older foundations. A dynasty might die while the city still breathed. A language might fade while its script remained alive in the hands of scholars. But every archive, no matter how carefully guarded, lived under threat. Clay can remember, but cities can die around it. In the rooms where tablets were stored, the ancient world placed its trust in order. Shelves, baskets, jars, labels, ceilings, and tablets formed quiet constellations of knowledge. Administrative records lay beside legal documents. School exercises rested near literary copies. Letters waited for readers who had long since turned to dust. Each tablet belonged to a network of human decisions. Someone shaped it. Someone wrote it. Someone dried it. Someone kept it. Someone expected it might be needed again. Then came disaster. A building catches fire. Smoke gathers under reed roofing. Flames run across beams. Mud brick walls redden with heat. Wooden shelves collapse. Jars burst. People flee through courtyards with children, tools, idols, or nothing at all. Outside, soldiers shout, or neighbours cry out, or the wind drives sparks over the roofline. The room that once held records becomes a furnace. And in that terrible moment, destruction performs an unintended act of preservation. Tablets that might have crumbled in dampness or been recycled into new clay are baked hard by fire. The archive dies, and the archive survives. This is one of the haunting paradoxes of ancient Mesopotamia. Some of the tablets that reach modern hands endured because the buildings around them burned. Catastrophe made them durable. Conquest, accident, riot, abandonment, or collapse could seal an archive beneath rubble, where it waited through empires, kingdoms, languages, and faiths that rose and fell above it. A text written for a local dispute or a school lesson might sleep longer than the civilization that produced it, but survival is never complete. Tablets break, corners snap away, lines vanish, salt rises through clay, surfaces flake. Excavations recover fragments without their original order. Looters tear objects from context. Old digs sometimes recorded too little. War scatters collections. Museums hold pieces separated from their joining fragments. A text may be known from one damaged copy, with its most important words missing in the broken centre. The past reaches us not as a library with open doors, but as a storm of pages without bindings. This is why scholars often work among broken voices. A fragment may contain the end of a sentence, but not its beginning. It may preserve a divine name, but not the action that mattered. It may list workers without the heading that explains the task. It may show numbers without the commodity. It may contain a mythic line so powerful that the imagination trembles. Yet the next lines are gone forever. The tablet invites understanding and denies completion. Still, the fragments are not mute. A trained reader can extract astonishing knowledge from them. The shape of a sign, the style of writing, the clay fabric, the tablet format, the archaeological layer, the seal impression, the names of officials, the sequence of numbers, and the formula of a phrase can all speak. Even a broken tablet may reveal the habits of a city, the rhythm of a school, the reach of a king, or the offerings of a temple. The work is painstaking. Fragments must be cleaned, conserved, catalogued, copied, photographed, and compared. Scholars search for joins, looking for pieces that once belonged to the same tablet. A tiny break line, a matching curve, a continuing sign, or a shared clay texture may reunite fragments separated for decades. When two pieces join, a lost sentence may breathe again. A myth may gain a missing verb. A legal case may recover a name. A school exercise may reveal its model. There is quiet drama in such moments, though no trumpet announces them. A scholar in a museum storeroom bends over two fragments beneath a lamp. The edges seem to answer each other. The signs align. What was two becomes one. A small part of the ancient mind is restored. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. because every join reminds us of all the pieces still missing. The buried libraries of Mesopotamia also challenge the idea that history belongs only to great monuments. A palace wall may impress the eye, but a tablet fragment may change the story. One broken letter can reveal political fear. One rationalist can expose the scale of labour. One omen text can show how uncertainty was interpreted. One school tablet can show how knowledge was taught. The smallest written object may hold more human detail than a tower, yet the archive is never neutral. What survives depends on what was written, what was stored, what was accidentally preserved, what archaeologists found, and what modern institutions protected. The voices of officials, scribes, priests, rulers, merchants, and educated elites are louder because they wrote more and because their tablets entered systems of storage. The poor, enslaved, displaced, and illiterate often appear only in the records of others. They are counted, assigned, judged, purchased, named, or unnamed. The clay preserves their traces, but rarely their own speech. This imbalance gives the ancient archive a moral tension. It is a miracle of preservation and a monument to silence. It tells us much, but not equally. It brings the past near, while reminding us that countless lives passed without durable words of their own. The first written language opened history, but history entered through narrow gates. Archaeology widens those gates when it can. Stratigraphic excavation places tablets within rooms, streets, destruction layers, and rebuilding phases. Radiocarbon dating of associated organic materials can help anchor the layers in time. Botanical remains reveal crops, fuel, and environment. Animal bones reveal diet, herding, sacrifice, and economy. Genomic data begins to trace human movement and ancestry, though it cannot replace language, culture, or lived experience. Each discipline adds another lamp in the dark archive. Still, no science removes the mystery entirely. A tablet may be dated, translated, imaged, and analysed, yet the human moment of its creation remains partly beyond reach. Was the scribe tired? Was the city afraid? Was the record routine, urgent, sacred, shameful, or contested? Did someone argue over the number written there? Did a worker depend on that entry for food? Did a king fear that his name would be erased? The tablet does not say, so the broken voices remain answerless and adrift to ponder. They lie in museums, universities, archives, excavation storerooms, private collections, and still beneath the soils of Iraq and surrounding lands. Some are famous, many are not. Some have been read many times. Others await specialists with the time, training, and patience to hear them. New imaging methods may reveal faded signs. Digital catalogues may connect scattered fragments. Future excavations may uncover archives still sealed by ancient collapse. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made. The ruins teach a solemn lesson. Writing can conquer silence, but not completely. Archives can resist death, but not escape damage. Civilizations can speak across millennia, but their voices arrive broken, formal, partial, and strange. What survives is enough to astonish the world, yet never enough to satisfy longing. In every clay fragment, there is both presence and absence. The mark is present, the hand is gone, the word remains, the voice is missing, the city lies buried, the record endures. This is the sorrow and splendour of Sumerian writing, that the first written language gave humanity a memory made of earth, and that even earth can crack. At the edge of the ancient world, where river mud hardened beneath the sun and reeds whispered over the waters, humanity learned to place memory outside the body. This was not a small achievement. It was not merely a technical improvement, like a sharper blade or a stronger basket. It was a change in the nature of time. For once, a thought could be pressed into clay. It could outlive the mouth that formed it. A promise could remain after the witness died. A name could endure after the bones of the named had become dust. The first written dawn did not shine with the brilliance of polished marble or the splendour of imperial gold. It glowed quietly from clay tablets, administrative lists, sacred offerings, school exercises, royal inscriptions, and stories of gods and mortals moving through a world of danger and longing. In those signs, the human past became newly visible. The age of silence did not end all at once, but a door opened. Through that door came history, not as legend alone, but as record. Sumerian writing reveals a profound truth. Civilization is built not only from walls, canals, temples, and fields, but from shared memory. A city must remember its stores, its obligations, its gods, its workers, its rulers, its laws, its victories, its failures, and its rituals. Without memory, order dissolves into argument. Without record, power depends only on voice, presence, and force. Writing gave society a second mind, one that could be stored in rooms, carried across distance, copied by students, and consulted by those not yet born when the first signs were made. Yet this second mind was never simple. It did not belong equally to everyone. It served institutions before it served private souls. It counted grain before it preserved grief. It named rulers more often than labourers. It gave endurance to official truth while leaving countless whispers unrecorded. The first written dawn was therefore both magnificent and uneven. It illuminated the world, but it also cast shadows. Some lives became visible. Others remained hidden behind numbers, titles, and silence. This should not diminish the wonder, it should deepen it. The tablets do not offer a perfect mirror of ancient life, but no source ever does. They are fragments of intention, pressed into matter by human hands. They remind us that history is not the past itself. History is what survives, what can be read, what can be compared, what can be questioned, what can be imagined carefully around the edges of evidence. The Sumerian tablet is both a witness and a ruin. To stand before such an object is to confront the strange intimacy of deep time. The tablet may be small enough to rest in the palm. Its surface may be cracked, worn, or incomplete. Its signs may record something ordinary, a measure of barley, a delivery of wool, a list of names, a student exercise. Yet it was touched by a person who lived 5,000 years ago. That person felt heat, hunger, duty, perhaps boredom, perhaps pride. Their hand pressed the stylus. Their marks remain. Between that hand and our eyes lies nearly the whole written history of humanity. There is humility in this encounter. The people of Sumer were not crude beginners stumbling toward the modern world. They were fully human, intellectually alert, spiritually intense, and socially inventive. They built cities in difficult landscapes. They organized labor and ritual at remarkable scale. They watched the rivers, feared the floods, honored the gods, trained scribes, measured fields, composed myths, and struggled against oblivion. Their world was different from ours, but not lesser. Their questions remain familiar. How should order be maintained? What do the gods or the universe require? How does power justify itself? What can survive death? How can memory be trusted? The first written language did not answer all these questions. It made them durable. This is perhaps its greatest legacy. Writing allowed human beings to argue with time. It did not defeat death, but it complicated death's victory. It allowed voices to cross distances they could never have imagined. It made possible archives, law codes, letters, scriptures, literature, science, philosophy, mathematics, diplomacy, and historical consciousness. Every book, every inscription, every signed treaty, every library catalogue, every message sent across the modern world belongs in some distant way to that first decision to let a mark stand for meaning. The road from the Sumerian tablet to the modern screen is long, winding, and filled with transformations. Clay gave way in many places to papyrus, parchment, paper, print, and electronic light. Scripts changed. Languages rose and vanished. Empires burned their enemies' archives and guarded their own. Scholars copied, translated, lost, rediscovered, and reinterpreted. Yet the essential miracle remains the same. A human mind leaves a sign. Another human mind receives it. Across this bridge, the dead are not fully dead. Still, for the most part. Secrets remain hidden. Beneath the soils of Mesopotamia, there may be tablets no living eye has seen for thousands of years. In museum storerooms, fragments may wait for joining. In damaged lines, names may sleep, half erased but not entirely gone. Future technologies may read what now appears unreadable. New excavations may change old theories, genomic data, environmental reconstruction, clay analysis, and careful stratigraphic study may sharpen the world around the texts. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made. But even if no new tablet were ever found, the achievement would remain immense. The first written language transformed the human condition because it made memory durable, portable, and collective. It allowed civilization to accumulate thought beyond the limits of one life. It gave the past a body, and it gave the future a way to listen. In the end, the Sumerian tablets speak with a voice both calm and overwhelming. They tell us that greatness can be humble in appearance. A clay fragment may be more revolutionary than a palace. A list of rations may stand closer to the birth of history than a jeweled crown. A student's awkward exercise may carry the trace of a mind learning to enter civilization's memory. The smallest marks may open the widest doors. And so the first written dawn still glows. It glows in every archive where tablets rest in careful silence. It glows in every scholar who leans over signs, patient before uncertainty. It glows in every reader who understands that the human story is not only made by conquest and collapse, but by the desire to remember. It glows in the fragile hope that something of us may remain. Not the whole self, never the whole self, but a mark, a name, a line, a witness. The people of Sumer pressed their world into clay because they needed to count, to serve, to rule, to teach, to praise, and to endure. They could not know the full path their invention would travel. They could not know that distant peoples, under distant skies, would one day study their signs and hear in them the beginning of recorded history. They could not know that their ordinary tablets would become sacred to memory itself. Yet here they are, small, broken, silent, immortal,